He was a cold-hearted millionaire CEO who lived only for success. Until one night, a terrible car crash changed everything. With a broken arm and a lonely heart, he thought he had lost control of his life. But then, a tiny voice asked a question that melted his soul. "Can you help me write a note to my mom?" That moment began a story of healing, love, and second chances, between a man who had everything and a little girl who had almost lost it all. Watch how fate turned pain into a miracle, and how one small note from a brave child changed a millionaire's heart forever. Thomas Gray was 34, a man whose name carried power. People called him the Ice King in business circles because he never smiled, never hesitated, and never lost. His words could change a company's future, and his signature was worth millions. That evening, as his silver car glided down a quiet suburban road, Thomas's thoughts were a blur of deals, contracts, and meetings. He had just closed another project worth millions, yet he felt nothing. No excitement, no pride. He was tired, not from work, but from emptiness. He wore his sky blue suit, his favorite one, crisp and elegant. His tie was perfect. His watch gleamed under the fading sunlight. To anyone who saw him driving by, he looked like success itself, calm, sharp, untouchable. But inside, Thomas was hollow. His heart felt like a locked room filled with silence. He had no wife to share dinner with, no family waiting at home. His parents were gone, leaving behind only a mansion too big and too quiet. For years, he had filled that silence with work, meetings, flights, and late-night emails. But the truth was cruel. Money could fill his bank, not his heart. The evening sky painted everything in soft gold as he drove past the city lights. For a moment, he loosened his tie, sighed, and whispered to himself, "Just one more deal, then maybe I'll rest." But fate had other plans. A truck speeding from the opposite direction lost control. Its headlights flared, bright and blinding. Thomas's eyes widened, his hands tightened around the wheel. He swerved right, tires screeching, but it was too late. Crash! The world exploded in chaos. Metal crumpled like paper. Glass shattered, slicing through the air like rainless thunder. The sound was deafening. One moment of pure, violent silence, then the roar of disaster. His car spun once, twice, then slammed against the curb. His body jerked forward as the seatbelt dug into his chest. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through his left arm. He screamed, but his voice barely escaped his lips. Then, silence. His vision blurred, his breath shallow. He could taste blood, feel the heat of pain crawling up his arm. His beautiful sky-blue suit was torn, soaked with crimson. His expensive watch, cracked, his perfect world, broken. Distant voices echoed around him. "Call 911! Is he breathing?" He wanted to answer, but his body wouldn't move. When the ambulance arrived, flashing lights filled the night. The paramedics' hands were quick and firm, wrapping his arm, lifting him from the wreck. Thomas barely heard them. Everything sounded far away, like a dream slowly slipping from his grasp. He caught one last glimpse of his car, shattered glass, twisted metal, before darkness swallowed him. When he woke, everything was white. A sterile ceiling, a faint beeping sound beside him. The air smelled like antiseptic and medicine. His arm was heavy, wrapped tightly in thick bandages. He blinked slowly, confused. A nurse leaned over him and whispered, "You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Gray." He nodded weakly, unable to form words. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about money. He wasn't thinking about deadlines or meetings. He was thinking about how close he had come to losing everything. His breath, his time, his life. He stared at the ceiling for hours, lost in thoughts he had buried for too long. The silence of the hospital room felt heavier than any boardroom he had ever sat in. He realized something that shook him to the core. All his success meant nothing if his heart had no one to share it with. He sighed deeply and closed his eyes, the soft hum of machines surrounding him. He thought he was alone in that cold, quiet room. Until he heard the door creak open, and a tiny voice broke the silence. "Excuse me, sir." The words were so soft that Thomas almost thought he imagined them. He turned his head slowly, careful not to move his injured arm, and his blue eyes met the sight that froze him completely. At the door stood a little girl, barely 5 years old. She wore a small yellow hospital gown that looked too big for her tiny frame. Her blonde hair, tied in messy pigtails, framed her pale face, and in her hand she clutched a small pink notebook as if it was her whole world. Her big blue eyes looked straight at him. The same eyes full of something Thomas hadn't seen in years, pure innocence mixed with quiet sadness. It hit him in the chest like a silent ache. "Can you help me write a note to my mom?" she asked in a trembling voice. Her words were clear, but her tone carried the weight of loneliness. Thomas blinked, confused, unsure if he had heard her right. He sat up slightly, the cast on his arm making it hard to move. "Your mom?" he asked softly. "Where is she, sweetheart?" The little girl hugged her notebook tighter. "She's sleeping," she whispered. "The nurse said she's very tired and can't wake up right now." Her eyes shimmered with tears she was trying so hard to hide. "But I want to tell her that I'm being brave. And I didn't cry today." Thomas felt his throat tighten. Something about the way she spoke, so gentle, so innocent, tore through his usual calmness. This child had no idea how deeply her words were piercing the heart of a man who thought he was unshakable. Before he could respond, a nurse quietly stepped in. Her expression softened as she looked at Thomas and whispered, "Her name is Stella. Her mother's in a coma. Same night you were brought in. Car accident." Thomas's heart sank. "The same night?" he asked, his voice low, almost guilty. The nurse nodded. "Yes, sir. She's been here every day, waiting outside her mom's room. She doesn't have anyone else. Her father left years ago." The nurse's words echoed in his mind like a haunting melody. He looked back at the little girl, standing there clutching her notebook. Her shoes slightly scuffed, her eyes full of courage no child her age should need. Something inside him cracked, a wall that had stood for years around his lonely heart. He swallowed hard, forcing a small, kind smile onto his face. "What's your name, little one?" he asked gently. "Stella," she said, her lips curling into a tiny smile. "That's a beautiful name," Thomas whispered. He hesitated for a moment, unsure what to say next. The powerful CEO, the man who could speak confidently in front of thousands, suddenly found himself speechless before a little girl holding a pink notebook. Her eyes widened with hope. "So, will you help me write my note, mister?" she asked, taking a small step forward. Her voice was timid, but her heart was brave. Thomas took a deep breath, looking down at his bandaged arm. He had signed contracts worth millions with this hand, yet now he was about to write something that truly mattered. "All right, Stella," he said softly, his voice filled with warmth he didn't know he still had. "Let's write that note together." Her face lit up instantly, her smile blooming like sunshine through hospital walls. She hurried closer, carefully placing her notebook on the tray beside his bed. Thomas noticed the front cover. It had colorful stickers, some stars, and the words written in a child's handwriting. "For Mommy." The sight made his chest tighten again. He picked up a pen with his good hand, trying not to show the pain that shot through his shoulder. "Okay," he said, clearing his throat gently. "What do you want to tell your mom first?" Stella's little eyes sparkled. She spoke slowly, thoughtfully, as if choosing her words with care. "Tell her I brushed my teeth, and that I didn't cry today, and that I love her all the way to the sky and back." Thomas felt something warm sting his eyes. He quickly looked down, pretending to focus on the paper. His voice was rough when he said, "That's beautiful, Stella. Your mom will love that." She nodded eagerly, her small fingers tapping the edge of the notebook as she watched him write. When he finished, she smiled proudly. "That's exactly what I wanted to say," she whispered. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her. This little stranger had walked into his life, breaking through walls that years of success and pride had built. In just a few minutes, she had brought warmth into a room that had been filled with nothing but cold silence. When Stella picked up her notebook, she turned to him and said softly, "Thank you, Mr. What's your name?" "Thomas," he replied. Her smile widened. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas." And with that, she left the room, her small footsteps fading down the hallway. Thomas sat still, his heart heavier yet strangely full. The sterile hospital room didn't feel so empty anymore. Something had changed. Something he couldn't explain. A spark had been lit in a man who thought he'd forgotten how to feel. He leaned back against the pillows, staring at the door where she had disappeared, and whispered to himself, "Little one, you just made this place feel alive again." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the pale hospital curtains, casting soft golden lines across Thomas's bed. He woke to the familiar beeping of the heart monitor, the quiet footsteps of nurses outside, and a gentle rhythm of calm that had settled after the accident. But something else was different that morning, the sound of tiny footsteps. He looked toward the door, and there she was again, Stella, tiptoeing carefully, clutching her pink notebook like a treasure chest. Her blonde hair was a little messy, her smile a little brighter. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas," she said softly, her voice filled with innocence that could melt even a frozen heart. Thomas couldn't help but smile back. "Good morning, little one. Ready to write another note?" She nodded eagerly and climbed onto the chair beside his bed. She carried a handful of colored pencils this time, red, blue, and green. Her tiny hands placed them carefully beside the notebook, as if she was preparing for something very important. Together they began their morning ritual. Thomas opened the notebook and said in a deep, gentle voice, "What shall we write today, Stella?" Her eyes sparkled. "Let's tell Mommy I ate all my lunch today." He grinned and began to write slowly, his injured hand trembling a little as the pen scraped across the page. "Dear Mommy, I ate all my lunch." Stella leaned closer, watching every letter form as if it were magic. "Now say I sang a song for her too," she added proudly. Thomas chuckled softly and wrote, "Dear Mommy, I sang a song for you." When he finished, she clapped her hands in delight. "Can you draw a heart too, Mr. Thomas?" He tried, but the cast made it hard to move his hand properly. The heart came out crooked. Stella giggled, her laughter soft and sweet like a melody. "It's a funny heart," she said. Thomas laughed too, though his voice trembled slightly. "It's a little broken," he said quietly, glancing at his arm, and maybe at his heart. "But still working," he added, smiling gently. Day after day, this became their little routine. Every morning, Stella arrived, sometimes humming, sometimes serious, but always with her notebook. And every day, together, they wrote something new. "Dear Mommy, I brushed my hair today. Dear Mommy, I shared my cookie with Mr. Thomas. Dear Mommy, I drew a rainbow for you." Each note was short, simple, and full of love. Yet somehow, it healed parts of Thomas that had been cold for years. The nurses began to notice how different he looked. The man who once spoke to no one and frowned at every sound now smiled at a child's laughter. Sometimes, when Stella wasn't there, he found himself missing her voice echoing down the hallway. He began to surprise her with little things. A new pack of crayons, a soft stuffed bunny he found in the gift shop, or a cookie from the cafeteria. Every time he gave her something, she looked at him like he'd handed her the moon. But deep inside, she was the one giving him more, a gift no money could buy. She was giving him belonging, warmth, and something he thought he'd lost forever: love. One afternoon, as they sat writing another note, Stella grew quiet. Her little fingers paused over her pencil, and she looked at him with big, thoughtful eyes. "Mr. Thomas," she said softly. "Yes, sweetheart. Mommy told me brave girls don't cry in hospitals." He looked at her for a long moment. Her voice was steady, but her lower lip trembled. He could see the tears hiding behind her courage. He reached out with his good hand and held hers gently. His touch was warm, steady, something between a friend and a father's care. He smiled faintly, though his eyes stung with emotion. "Then you must be the bravest girl I've ever met," he said softly. Stella's little hand tightened around his fingers. She didn't say anything. She just looked up at him with a shy, grateful smile, and that smile said more than words ever could. That night, long after she left his room, Thomas couldn't sleep. He stared at the notebook she had forgotten on his bed. He opened it, reading the notes they had written together. "Dear Mommy, I love you. Dear Mommy, I'm brave. Dear Mommy, Mr. Thomas says you'll wake up soon." He ran his fingers gently over her uneven handwriting, and something deep inside him cracked open, like light breaking through darkness. A single tear rolled down his cheek as he whispered to himself, Maybe she's healing more than just her mom. And for the first time in years, the once cold millionaire felt alive, not because of success, not because of wealth, but because a little girl had taught him the true meaning of love through letters written with crayons and hope. The hospital corridor was quiet that evening, too quiet. The clock ticked softly and the fluorescent lights hummed above, throwing a pale glow over the sterile walls. Thomas had grown used to seeing Stella skipping down the hall with her little pink notebook, her pigtails bouncing, her laughter echoing faintly. But that night, the laughter never came. He was sitting on his hospital bed staring blankly at his healing arm when he saw a nurse rush past his door. Something about her expression made his stomach twist. Moments later, he saw Stella, running, her notebook clutched to her chest, tears glistening in her wide blue eyes. Her tiny shoes squeaked against the floor as she disappeared around the corner. Thomas didn't even think. He jumped out of bed, ignoring the throb in his fractured arm, and followed her down the corridor. Each step made pain shoot through him, but his heart was already hurting worse than his body. He found her near the vending machine, the same one where she used to wait for candy after their letter-writing sessions. She was sitting on the cold floor, knees drawn to her chest, her head buried in her arms. The pink notebook lay open beside her, its pages damp with her tears. "Stella," Thomas whispered softly, kneeling down. The girl lifted her face, her cheeks streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't write her last note yet," she cried brokenly. "What if she doesn't get it now?" Her voice trembled, filled with fear and heartbreak. Thomas felt something deep inside him collapse, that cold, lonely wall he had built around his heart for years. He wanted to say something to make it right, but no words felt enough. Finally, he reached for her notebook with his good hand. His voice was low, tender, filled with emotion. "Then let's write it together right now, okay? She'll feel it, I promise." She sniffled and nodded weakly. Her little fingers held onto his as if holding hope itself. Together, on the next clean page, they began to write. Thomas wrote slowly, each letter shaking slightly from the pain in his arm and the heaviness in his chest. "Dear Mommy," Stella began, her small hand guiding his. "I love you forever," Thomas added softly. "Even if you sleep for a long time, she'll keep being brave." Stella looked up at him with tearful eyes. He smiled through his pain and whispered, "She'll feel every word, sweetheart." Then she continued, her voice breaking, "I met Mr. Thomas. He's nice. He says I'm brave like you." When they finished, Thomas just stared at the page. His throat tightened and his eyes blurred with tears that refused to stay hidden anymore. For years, he had buried his emotions under success, money, and pride. But in that quiet hospital corner, beside a 5-year-old girl who had lost almost everything, Thomas Gray finally cried. He placed his hand gently on Stella's head. "You're not alone, little one," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm here." She leaned into his chest and he felt her tiny heartbeat, fragile but strong. That night, the millionaire who once thought he needed no one discovered the power of connection, love, and loss. And as he held Stella close, he realized something. Sometimes the smallest hearts carry the greatest strength, and sometimes hope doesn't die. It just finds a new home. Morning light streamed through the hospital windows, painting golden streaks across the white walls. The air felt different, softer, warmer, as if something unseen had shifted in the world overnight. Thomas sat on the edge of his bed, buttoning his freshly pressed shirt with one hand. His arm still ached, but his heart was strangely calm. He thought about Stella, her bravery, her tiny voice, and the note they had written together. He wondered if her mom would ever feel it, if love written in shaky letters could somehow reach the deepest sleep. Just as he stood to pour himself a glass of water, the door burst open. A nurse hurried in, her face flushed with disbelief and joy. "Mr. Gray!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "Stella's mom! She's awake!" For a moment, Thomas couldn't breathe. The words echoed in his mind like a miracle spoken aloud. He set the glass down, his hands shaking. "Are you sure?" he asked, almost afraid to believe. The nurse nodded, her eyes glistening. "Yes, sir. She opened her eyes this morning and said her daughter's name." Before he could even think, Thomas was already in the hallway, walking as fast as his healing body would allow. He found Stella at the nurse's desk, her face lit up like sunlight. "Mr. Thomas!" she cried, her little hands trembling as she grabbed his sleeve. "Mommy woke up! Mommy woke up!" Her joy was pure, unfiltered, radiant. It filled the corridor like music. Together, they hurried down the hall toward the recovery room. When they entered, the air felt sacred, as if the entire hospital had paused to witness a miracle. On the bed lay a pale woman with soft brown hair and kind eyes that had just reopened after weeks of stillness. Her lips moved weakly and her voice came out like a whisper carried by the wind. "Stella, baby." The little girl dropped her pink notebook, its pages fluttering like wings across the floor. She ran to her mother, tears spilling freely, laughter breaking through her cries. Her small arms wrapped tightly around her mom's neck, and she whispered between sobs, "Mommy, I was brave, just like you said." Thomas stood in the doorway, frozen. He watched as the woman slowly stroked her daughter's hair, smiling weakly but beautifully. Something inside him cracked, not from pain but from overwhelming gratitude. He leaned against the wall, blinking back tears he didn't want to hide anymore. Every heartbeat reminded him of how fragile and precious life was. The accident that shattered his bones had somehow led him to this, a moment of rebirth, of faith restored. He didn't believe in fate before, but now he couldn't deny it. He had been meant to be there. Stella turned to look at him, her eyes shining like the morning sky. She smiled through her tears, a smile that carried more meaning than words ever could. And in that single look, Thomas understood. The crash hadn't destroyed him. It had led him home, not to a house filled with wealth and trophies, but to a place filled with love, courage, and healing. He whispered quietly to himself, "Sometimes miracles don't come from prayer. They come from pain." And as sunlight poured into the room, Thomas realized that this was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of a new one. A story written not in business reports or contracts, but in letters of love and second chances. A week later, Thomas was discharged. His arm had healed, but his heart had been completely transformed. He couldn't bring himself to leave without saying goodbye. When he entered Stella's room, she ran to him with her notebook. "I have one last note for you," she said, handing it to him shyly. He opened it. In wobbly handwriting, it read, "Dear Mr. Thomas, thank you for helping me write notes. You helped my heart not be lonely. Mommy says you're our hero." Thomas knelt down, tears in his eyes, and hugged her gently. "No, Stella, you're mine," he whispered. Months later, he helped Stella's mom recover fully, paying for her treatments quietly without telling anyone. He visited them often, bringing flowers, laughter, and warmth. Thomas Gray, once a cold-hearted millionaire, had found a family not through money or success, but through kindness and love. Ending message. In a world that often forgets compassion, a little act of kindness can heal the deepest wounds. Thomas learned that real wealth isn't in money, but in the hearts you touch. And a little girl named Stella reminded him, and all of us, that love can turn strangers into family.